What's up, Yinzers, Yinzettes? Welcome back to yet another edition of Pucks and Nat, where we will give you the latest downtown breakdowns and everything from this last week in Penguins hockey. I am joined, as usual, by my co-host, Hunter Hodies. Hunter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing super well. I mean, it's pretty dead right now in the Penguins land. We haven't done a show in the last couple of weeks, but there's still quite a bit to talk about, even though they're not making moves right now. But heck, a lot of the hockey world isn't making a lot of moves right now just because everyone's at the cottages and everyone's at the beach with their families.
Yeah, speaking of which, I am headed to the beach today, later today. We were just talking about some books we're going to read. And books we like to read at the beach. I'm personally going to be delving into some Star Wars lore. But what are your favorite books to read at the beach?
I was at Virginia Beach last weekend. That's why we didn't do a show. I was there for a few days. I finished the second novel of the Aftermath trilogy, and I'm starting this week the third one, which I've heard is the best of the three. The first one was kind of going through that, and then I'll figure out what I want to read next. But my goal is to read all the canon books, well, the new canon at least, just because I'm a total nerd. So that's where I'm going to be reading. So yeah, I am reading some Star Wars. Kelsey's reading some Star Wars. It's always good when you dive into that universe, and it's always fun to read those books on the beach.
Yeah, and I'm glad I have a podcast partner that can appreciate, my Star Wars nerddom because this is a thing that stretches back farther than, being a hockey nerd, honestly. But yeah, I'm reading the Darth Bane trilogy, so that's going to be on my reading list. This is the second one, Rule of Two. I also want to get to reading Lord of the Rings at some point. I've read The Hobbit, but I'd like to read the trilogy sometimes because
Yes.
love the movies, and I know that they're difficult reads, but I'm up for the challenge.
They're fun. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in those books that we're not put in the movies that more people need to realize. I love those books.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much lore too that's
Oh
like
yeah.
published now too outside of it. So yeah. Reading at the beach, but before then, we're going to talk about a few things Penguins related. As Hunter said, it is kind of slow right now, but there's always something to talk about. And so we're going to delve into a couple things here, but obviously something that's been a huge topic of discussion on our show for basically the whole entire summer, pretty much since last trade deadline, has been Brian Russ, Rickard Rakell, and Erik Karlsson. Everybody knows that those names are hot commodities on the market. Everybody knows that they're being thrown around in some trade speculation. But today we're going to talk about maybe some Penguins names that aren't Rust, Rakell, or Karlsson, who may be on the move, or maybe we should be, looking for to be on the move. So, Hunter, you can kick things off. What names are you keeping an eye on that aren't one of those big three names there?
Yeah. So first off, I am just so sick of the talk regarding the big three. Just wake me up when something actually happens and we don't have to keep reading the same articles and reports over and over.
Writing the same ones too.
Literally, let's wait to see what happens over the next month. August is usually the month of Kyle Dubas, especially these last couple of years where he'll just make moves out of nowhere. No one saw the Rucker McGroarty trade coming. Erik Karlsson trade kind of came a little bit out of nowhere 2 years ago as well. So he likes making some big moves in August. I would not be surprised if we get another one here. But outside of those three, pay attention to someone like Noel Acciari. I'm just not sure if I see a fit for him right now on the current roster. Danton Heinen, I think it's the same thing. I just don't know if I truly see a fit for him right now. Those are like the two biggest ones. Like some people may also throw out Blake Lizotte, but I think there's actually a place for him on the roster. I would put him on the fourth line right now with someone like a Justin Brazeau, for example. If you want to also put Connor Dewar there, I think that would be interesting. That would be a pretty forechecking, menacing fourth line. I mean, it's not the best fourth line in the league, but I think it would piss a lot of other teams off, in my opinion. But again, like the main two for me, Heinen, Acciari. I don't really know who else could be on the market just because like Hollander, he's trying to make the team. They're not going to trade Dewar. They're not going to trade Thomas. They just signed him. You have Novak coming back. You just signed Anthony Mantha. But again, like those are the two big ones that really jump out to me where I'm like, not really sure I see the fit right now for them in the bottom six. Like, for example, I think Brazeau is a better version of Noel Acciari does everything better than him, in my opinion. And then Heinen, you have a couple players just like him on the team. So I think if you can find a way to get rid of those two before the season to maybe solve a little bit of that logjam, I think that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I have those two names, to Achari and Heinen. I do think, even if they don't deal, especially someone like Heinen prior to the season, he's a waiver candidate as well. I mean, if you lose him for nothing, you lose him for nothing, or if you have to bury him in Wilkes-Barre, you bury him in Wilkes-Barre. The Penguins have plenty of cap space. It's not an issue for them, really. Couple other names I might be keeping an eye on. Now, I agree with you about Blake Lizotte, and I do see the value in keeping somebody like Lizotte, at least through the trade deadline, because I think he is perfect for the role that he's in. We even saw at times last season when he was elevated to that third line center role, he kind of showed a little bit of offensive upside, and then that kind of just ended abruptly. They had that pretty good third line together. I think it was Philip Tomasino, Blake Lizotte, and Anthony Beauvillier, and they kept that together for a few games. They had something going, and then Anthony Beauvillier, I think, made a boneheaded decision during a game against the New York Rangers that directly led to like the game-winning goal against, and then they never played together again after that. So yeah, I mean, I see the intrigue in keeping Lizotte around, at least for now. I think that could really be an energy line for the Penguins if you have Lizotte, Dewar, and Brazeau, like you said. I kind of like the look of that line. As far as Achari, I do think maybe people underestimate the fact that he might have some value to a contending team as a depth forward, because at the end of the day, this guy was third in the league in forwards among block shots last season. He's also up there in hits among forwards. So it's not like he's a nothing burger down there. He does a lot of the dirty work. Former head coach Mike Sullivan used to talk about how that's still so weird to say. I just got to say that it's still weird to say former Penguins head coach Mike Sullivan. But anyway, he used to talk about how Achari did these thankless jobs for the Penguins. I do think that's the case. If a team like the Leafs, if a team, like some of these other contending teams are looking for depth on their roster, not necessarily a guy to play every day, I think his salary is low enough a cap hit that it doesn't really damage some of these teams that might even be, a few million off the cap. That's more so the issue, is the cap strapped nature of teams, but I can see him moving for the right package. Another guy I'd throw in is Kevin Hayes. And for me, Kevin Hayes has 1 year left on his deal. I think it's like 3.74 million or something.
I believe it's 3.5.
3.5. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, again, it's a little high a cap hit for what he's going to bring to a lineup. He's not going to play in anybody's top six. He's going to be a bottom six forward. But he did show some value in that second half last season for the Penguins. He is still a valuable veteran presence. Maybe for a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets, maybe for a team like the Detroit Red Wings, Buffalo Sabres, who kind of need a steadying veteran presence to kind of bring together a locker room. Because one thing about Hayes, you can say what you want about his foot speed on the ice or the on-ice product in general, but he is a glue guy in that locker room. The guys love Kevin Hayes in that locker room, and he's a really important figure for some of these young guys. So I could see him maybe with some retention moving somewhere, like I said, like a Detroit or a Columbus, something like that. So those are kind of the names that I would keep an eye on, but I agree with you. You gotta somehow, cure this logjam a little bit, because Dubas said something interesting right before free agency, when he was talking about the plan for free agency. And he kind of said that he doesn't want to just hand these young guys roster spots. He wants there to be competition for roster spots. He doesn't want them to feel entitled to anything. While I do agree with that approach, it's good to have competition for these roster spots. I do think it does reach a point where it becomes players blocking these young guys from making the roster. And that's a situation you might run into, assuming nobody else is moved off this roster on the forward front come training camp. So I think to kind of clear up even just one spot, that's probably something that should be a priority for Dubas before the season starts.
I do agree. Like, he needs to at least make one trade involving forward, if not two, in some way, shape, or form. I will disagree a little bit. I don't think any of these younger guys like Koivu and McGroarty are going to be blocked. Like, if they do enough at camp of preseason, which I think they're going to be on this team to start the season. You saw the sample size at the end of the year. You saw the potential that they have. And yeah, I know it's a short sample size, but I think they will be on this team once the season starts. And even someone like Philip Hollander, they just signed him at the end of April to a 2-year contract. I wrote about him a couple weeks ago. They are really impressed with him, with what he did in the Swedish Hockey League. He goes out there, wins a spot during camp. They're not going to block him just because of the player that he has turned into overseas. It's been a completely different player, honestly, this last couple of years compared to who he originally was in the Penguin system once, again, before he left for Sweden. So those three guys, I don't think they're going to block. Pickering, I don't think they're going to block him either, especially when you look at the left side right now. I think if he does enough, I think he will be on this team. Again, I know the left side is really bad. You have Brian Shea, Ryan Graves, you have Alexiev, you have Parker Weatherspoon, but still, like, a lot of these options, they're fine, but they're not, like, obviously game changers. So if Pickering does plenty, I think he can definitely get a spot coming out of camp in the preseason. Brunik is the hardest one right now, just because that right side is really crowded. You still haven't traded Erik Karlsson yet. Chris Letang, is coming back. Mac Dumba, Connor Clifton are going to be jockeying for playing time. And if you keep all those guys, just don't know if you see a spot right now for Brunik. But hey, maybe you have a good old-fashioned John Marino situation where he does so much during camp of preseason that you have to trade one of those people that you just acquired to try and get maybe a future asset in return. That's also a possibility. But again, we just have to see what happens once camp starts in, what is it now, Kelsey, a month and a half? So we're getting close.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, in 67 days till the regular season, as the Penguins posted today. So hockey's closer than we know it, folks. We won't be, bored out of our minds during the summer too much longer. And as you said, if Dubas makes a surprise move in August, we'll kind of expect that, I guess. But as usual, be kind of thrown off our rockers a little bit. So we'll see what happens. But just one final note about something you said there. Hollander was the SHL Forward of the Year this past season. And, I think, and I've watched a little bit of film from this past season on him. You can notice a difference, from pre-SHL season or a couple of years to this. Where he is now. There's a tangible difference there. He looks like a more complete player. He looks like a more NHL ready player. And he looks like a guy that could potentially make an impact in a bottom six, especially with his two-way game. So, I agree. I think, you like to think these guys have roster spots essentially locked down, but it does make it tough because, the guys that they would beat out probably have to pass through the waiver wire. So it becomes a little bit complicated. So that's why I think even if they can free up one of those spots, because right now they have 13 forwards on their active roster, that doesn't include any of McGroarty, Koivunen, or Hollander. Yep. So, they got to clear something up somewhere. And, there's still room for Rakell to be traded, Russ to be traded. Any of the guys that we mentioned before, but one way or another, I think they got to free up a little bit of wiggle room there. So we'll see on the forward front. I agree about the defense too. The only place that I kind of disagree is Owen Pickering because, Alexiev spent most of the season last year in the AHL with the Hershey Bears. But, given the situation on the left side, I don't see Ryan Graves going anywhere. I think he's kind of stuck there. Witherspoon's going to be on this roster. I don't think it's necessarily a given that Owen Pickering is on this opening night roster, just given the fact that they have 4 left side guys there that are already vying for those spots anyways. And you basically have 2 locks there. Whether Ryan Graves plays or not is a different story, but he's going to be on the roster on opening night. Sorry, folks. I know when I wrote this trade article this past week and I mentioned Achari, Heinen, and Hayes in it, And I had people saying, well, where's Graves? Where's Jari? It's like, guys, let's be realistic about this. It's one of those things. Obviously, ideally, if there is something out there, potential out there for Ryan Graves to be moved off this roster, I'm sure Kyle Dubas will jump on that opportunity first thing, but it's just not out there, guys. So, we'll see what happens, but it'll be interesting. Nonetheless, I think the goaltending situation is going to be interesting too. I know we've talked about that, but on that note, we're talking about Hollander. We're talking about Pickering. We're talking about Brunick, Koivunen, McGroarty. Let's talk about who we think are the top 5 Penguins prospects in the system right now. And I think this gets a little bit interesting because, the Penguins had 3 first-round picks this season and Ben Kindle, Bill Zonin, and Will Horkoff. Would they figure into the mix? Do any of them kind of automatically enter that space? So I'll let you start. I want to know, who are your top 5 prospects, starting with 5, working your way up?
So it's funny. I didn't really have like a specific order. I guess we can still include Koivunen and McGroarty as prospects just because they haven't played as many NHL games yet. Those are 2 on my list. Obviously, Harrison Brunick, Sergei Murashov, and I would also probably say Ben Kindle, I think at this point. I would have Owen Pickering hovering right around there. I think Brunick has passed him at least right now, in my opinion. Just that's based on, I think, the potential that he has. I think Brunick has a little bit of better potential compared to Pickering, but I still think Pickering is going to be a good player at the NHL level. But Kindle just drafted. I mean, you can make an argument right now, Kelsey, that he is the best prospect in the system. Like with the talent that he has, how smart he is, his two-way play, he is going to become a very good NHL player once he's ready. He was already ridiculously good in the Western Hockey League this season. Imagine what he's going to be at 22 years old in a few years. I think he has the potential to be a 70 to 75 point guy in the NHL. I think if he really hits, he could get close to, we're talking, 85, 95 points, somewhere there. Not sitting here saying he's going to be a superstar, but I think he could be a very good player in the league if, he reaches his true peak. But I think at the start, he could eventually be a 65, 70, 75 point player, but he's still a few years away, of course. But one of the best, Harrison Brunick, very close to making the team last year. He'll have another shot this year. Murashov, obviously, I think he's the best goalie in the system. I don't think he's going to be ready this year. People have to really be patient with someone like him. Everyone's like, oh, put him in the NHL right away. Put him in the NHL right away. No, that's not how this works. You need to see how he does in a full season with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. He showed that he was better than the ECHL this past year. Let's see what he can do as the starter if he earns that. And then obviously for Koivunen and McGroarty, there's not really much to say. They looked the part at the end of the 24-25 season. I think they will be on the roster, but they just haven't played enough games, so we kind of have to put them here as prospects. If I didn't, again, I'd put Owen Pickering in there for one of those spots. And I'd have to think a little bit. I'd have to think maybe a little bit more if you want to put Yoel Blomqvist in there. I think that may also make some sense if you also want to put someone like a, Melvin Fernstrom in there, Tristan Brose. You can do that as well. But that's if we weren't classifying them as prospects. But we are, so they're obviously in my top 5.
Gotcha. Yeah. Hey, I have a couple honorable mentions, I guess. And I do want to mention Will Horkoff because I wouldn't say he's not top 5 for me at this point, but I have to say, I mean, I know it was only development camp, and he is currently at the World Junior Summer Showcase with Team USA as well. He's kind of pleasantly surprised me up to this point. I mean, I know he was a first-round pick, so it shouldn't really come all that much as a surprise that he, looks pretty decent, but again, we've mentioned this on this show before. He was the youngest player in college hockey last season. He was playing for Michigan. So it's fair to assume that his game is only going to grow from here. He's probably in a pretty good position to have a good season over at the University of Michigan. So I'm kind of curious to see what he does this season because I think he's somebody that could very quickly rise up in those ranks. especially with the type of game he plays. You know, we talked about this during development camp, but you saw the way he's fearless. He drives the net. He's crafty. You know, he's got a lot of smarts. He has a strong two-way game. You know, this is a guy that if he develops the right way, you know, he has top 6 ceiling potential. I think he has very good potential as a third line center. So we'll kind of see how he develops. He's the one that I'm kind of curious about, and probably the one that I'm most intrigued by, that it wasn't necessarily expected. I'm also curious to see about Avery Hayes and what he does this season. He did sign that 2-year entry-level contract. Just put together a really impressive season for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins last season. Obviously, his brother Travis was just drafted and joined the organization as well. But Avery Hayes kind of plays that abrasive style too. You know, he's another good net front guy. He isn't the biggest guy, but he kind of plays bigger than his size a little bit. So those are the 2 guys I'm keeping an eye on. But for my top 5, I gotta generally agree with you. For me, I do put Owen Pickering in that 5th spot. You know, I think he, out of all these guys, he obviously has seen the most NHL time up to this point. We saw how ready he looked at the beginning of that stint. He faded a little bit down the stretch before he was sent back down to Wilkes-Barre Scranton. And even Wilkes-Barre Scranton head coach Kirk McDonald said that, you know, that first couple weeks for Pickering back in Wilkes-Barre Scranton was a little bit of an adjustment for him. And, you know, it didn't really pan out the way they were hoping those first couple weeks. But by the end of the season, he was right back to form. So, you know, I'm still keeping him there. I agree with you. He's still a guy that has top 4 potential. I don't think he's a future top pairing defenseman, but I'm also no prospect expert. So this is just me talking on a podcast, just a measly little writer for the Hockey News Pittsburgh Penguins site. So anyway, Owen Pickering's 5 for me. I still like the potential of this guy. I'd love the potential of a Brunick-Pickering pairing in the future, which we can get to in a second here. And then for 4, I'm going to go Murashov as well. You know, when I was kind of thinking of this, I was thinking about some of these core pieces of the Penguins' future. You know, you have a potential future franchise goaltender, potential being the key word. You got 2 defensemen and 2 forwards here for me. So Murashov showed a lot at the ECHL level last season. His playoffs didn't quite go the way people wanted to see that go, but the team also didn't play very well in front of him. The Wheeling Nailers just didn't show anything in that very brief first round playoff series. So Murashov, a full year at the AHL level will be beneficial to him. I agree with you. I think that is kind of his spot. I don't want to say to lose, but I think he will earn that spot. The goaltending situation is a little bit interesting in Wilkes-Barre Scranton because with the acquisition of Artur Shilovs at the NHL level, you got Jari and him probably. And then you got Yoel Blomqvist, Sergei Murashov, Philip Larson, Taylor Gauthier. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But he's 4 for me. And then this is where it gets a little interesting because I personally have Rutger McGroarty at 3. I know a lot of people have Koivunen, McGroarty default 1 and 2. But for me, I love McGroarty's potential. I love what he showed at the end of last season. I do think as an offensive player, Koivunen probably has a higher ceiling than McGroarty does in terms of production. I do love the versatility to McGroarty's game, though, and the simplicity and just the high IQ nature of his game. And that was already evident next to Crosby. I think he'll be in the top 6 for the Penguins for years to come. Same with Koivunen. I have him at number 2. My number 1's Harrison Brunick. I'm just so impressed by this guy. It's a little bold. I know a lot of people have Koivunen at number 1 at this point, but I think it says a lot that Harrison Brunick, also at the World Junior Summer Showcase, was paired with Matthew Schaefer there on the top pairing. And I think that kind of says a lot about the way Team Canada feels about Harrison Brunick. The Penguins as an organization love this guy. And the more and more I watch him, his mobility is impressive. His puck moving ability is impressive. His transition game is impressive. His skating is obviously, really, really good for somebody of his age. And I do think that he's going to make some decisions difficult for the Penguins during training camp this season. So we shall see, but those are my top 5 there. Is there anybody else you kind of want to throw into the mix or throw a hat in for?
Honestly, no. I still think you probably need to find a spot for Ben Kindle in there, just because I think he is easily one of the 5 best prospects in the system and might be number 1 right now. Actually, because I didn't really do a ranking, I just came up with my 5 in no order. But if I had to do a ranking, I would put Ben Kindle number 1 just based on his potential.
Okay.
I know he hasn't have any NHL experience yet, but in terms of just how good he already is and how good he can be in the future, I would have him number 1, and then I'd have, probably if I had to like rank them here, I'd go Kindle 1, McGroarty 2, Koivunen 3, Brunick 4, and then Marashov 5. At least that's how I would do it right now. But that was my rankings. I did it in no order earlier, but I will do it in order now.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, but
that's okay.
but thanks. This is part of the fun exercise. And one last thing here too. I mean, I think it does kind of speak to how much better the Penguins prospect pool has gotten in literally just 2 short years.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the kinds of conversations that we were having about this very topic 2 years ago. I mean, we were talking about Sam Poulin, Valtteri Puustinen. No disrespect to those guys at all, but they never had quite prospects of this caliber. There's still not, a superstar in the making in their system. And I do agree that Ben Kindle has the highest ceiling. But I kind of want to see what Kindle does this season, presumably again with the Calgary Hitmen. And we'll see if that CHL, AHL rule kind of comes into effect next season for somebody like Ben Kindle, because I think that'll be potentially an interesting storyline to follow for 2026, 2027. So let's wrap things up. If you've been paying attention to Penguins hockey for the past quarter century, Sidney Crosby, being a Pittsburgh Penguin, it's been 2 decades as of July 30th. So as of July 30th, Sidney Crosby has officially been a Pittsburgh Penguin for 20 years. 20 whole years, Hunter. And let me just say, I mean, you think about what has happened in those 20 years, not even just from a hockey perspective. Like when Sidney Crosby was drafted by the Penguins, smartphones did not exist. We did not have Twitter. We didn't have the iPhone. There's so many things that have happened in 2 decades of Sidney Crosby. But even just from a hockey perspective, 3 Stanley Cup championships. There's been turmoil with his concussion issues as well, some injury concerns, kind of some organizational turmoil midway through that term in the early 2010s, before their back-to-back runs. You have another, generational all-time great in Connor McDavid enter the league 10 years after Sidney Crosby. And here we are 10 years later, Connor McDavid is already reaching double digits in time in the league. So Hunter, just reflecting on 20 years of Sidney Crosby and just what he's meant to this franchise and just the whole scope of things over these 20 years. Just what do you think of when you think of 20 years of Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh?
Well, first off, I think we're all old now. Time flies. Fun. It's been crazy that it's already been 20 years of him here. And it's so funny. You look back and there's all that hype around, he's the next one. He's going to be one of the greatest players to ever play the game. And you see the expectations like that. And it's always awesome when a player not only hits those expectations, he exceeds them by 10,000 levels. 3-time Stanley Cup champion, has the Conn Smythes, has the Olympic golds, has the World Cup of Hockey, has the Four Nations face-off, has the World Championship. He's won practically everything you've needed to win in terms of the sport of hockey. He's going to have a chance to win another Olympic gold next year at the Olympics, and that might be the final time he ever plays for Team Canada at the Olympics. Of course, we'll have to see if he's still playing 4 years from now. But again, that's very too much to be determined. But I mean, He's been everything to this team, this city, both on and off the ice. At worst, he's the second best player to ever play for this franchise, second best player in the franchise's history. He's going to be someone that has his number retired the day after he retires from the Penguins, first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the 5 greatest players to ever play the game. And it's just been a blast watching this era of Penguins hockey, like the way that he's been able to conduct himself both on and off the ice. And even just outside of Pittsburgh, you still remember a time when he was so, disliked by so many fans. That's really gone down a bit these last several years, especially as a lot of these other fans have seen him growing up. But, we've been saying for a while, it's been like that for almost his entire career. That was just an unfair label on him by Ken Hitchcock, which that really annoyed me at the time because of everything that happened early on in his career. And then every fan base and every media person outside of Pittsburgh just ran with that whole thing of him being a crybaby. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. But again, it's just been everything, truly. And it's been crazy how fast that this has gone by.
Yeah.
We'll get to this in a second, but Evgeni Malkin is now 39 years old. Again, time really does fly when you're having fun.
It does. And, you mentioned Sid's expectations coming into the league. I mean, you think about the fact, and I mentioned it, Twitter, not being a thing when Sid came into the league. Like, I don't necessarily think, unless you were alive for when this was happening, like the hype around this guy, like I can only imagine if social media was a thing when Sidney Crosby was coming into the league, that it would have been nuts. I mean, this guy was like superstar level. I think, I don't know if it was Colby Armstrong or Max Talbot, but one of them said like going around with Sid in Canada in that rookie season was like the Beatles. You walked in everywhere. And I think it was Colby that said they walked into like a convenience store or something. And I want to say Montreal. It might have been Toronto, but there was like a cardboard cutout of like Sidney Crosby just like in that store. And it's just like, this is the kind of hype that this guy had and the expectations that he had, going into the league, coming into the league. And meanwhile, Sid is saying stuff as an 18-year-old, 17-year-old, like, oh, if I make the team, if I make the team this season, it's like, I don't think you got to worry about that. But anyway, that kind of speaks to just the kind of person he is, the kind of character he is. I've told stories on here before about just how everything people say about him as a human is definitely, true. There isn't anything that has ever been said about him that's untrue, other than the whining, the whole discourse about that. But it's interesting to me too, because not only has he exceeded the hype, but what impresses me most is just how he continues to just dominate the league. He's turning 38. What is it, August 1st? He's turning 38 in 6 days, and he's still a top 10 player in the National Hockey League. That just doesn't happen. Like, it doesn't happen. It didn't. When Wayne Gretzky reached this age, he wasn't playing at the level Sid is playing right now. It's incredible to think about that. 20 consecutive seasons of point per game. He broke Wayne Gretzky's record this season. He can tack on a few more seasons to that. This could reach a point where this record becomes pretty untouchable, depending on how long he plays. But the most impressive thing is the longevity and just how almost his story still feels incomplete, despite all this stuff that he's accomplished, despite 3 Stanley Cups, despite the Olympic gold medals, the World Championship gold medals, the list goes on and on. Of all the things this guy has accomplished, it still feels like his story is being written, and that there's not really an ending point. And I'm very excited to see just what these next few years look like for him. We know what to expect from the Penguins as an organization, at least for next season. But I'm kind of curious how these next few years look for Sid, how he embraces this mentorship role in this transitional period with the Penguins. And if he, wants to see this through to the other side. It's Sid. Of course he wants to win another playoff game in Pittsburgh. Of course he wants to win another Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh. So if Sidney Crosby wants to win again in Pittsburgh, Sidney Crosby will win again in Pittsburgh. If that's his goal, he will play as long as it takes to reach that goal in Pittsburgh. So we'll see. Stories still being written. And you mentioned Evgeni Malkin. I do want to take a second because Evgeni Malkin, as you said, just turned 39 yesterday, July 21st. First of all, happy birthday, Gino. But let's reflect on Gino for a second, too, because obviously he's entering the final year of his contract. Everyone knows and everybody's kind of keeping an eye on what might happen after this season because Gino himself has said that he wants to compete again in a Penguins uniform. So you got to wonder if this is going to be it for Gino, and if it is it for Gino, how we're going to look back on his career in Pittsburgh too.
Right. I mean, it's still, I think, too early to say for sure if this is going to be his last season. I mean, we've obviously seen the report from the Athletics' Josh Yohe that he's heard that from people in the organization that this is going to be his last year. To me, again, respect Josh quite a bit. I think it's still a little too soon, a little too premature to say that it is definitely going to be his last year because they still have to talk with his agent. They got to talk with him to say hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to play another year and all that? So that's going to be something that they'll discuss. If I had to guess, Kelsey, during the Olympic break, especially just because we all know that Russia's not going to be there, Gino's not going to be playing in the Olympics, so they'll have plenty of time to, again, figure out that situation, speak to his agent, and then maybe they'll have a decision or close decision at that point, and then maybe revisit it a little bit more after the season. But Evgeni Malkin, I feel like, has been one of the most underappreciated players of this era. The amount of disrespect I've seen people throw his way is kind of absurd. This guy's going to go down as a top 20, top 25 player of all time, a top 3 Russian player ever. I think right now I would go Ovechkin 1, him 2, and then 3 kind of up for debate. Fedorov there. I think Nikita Kucherov could also be at number 3. I've seen some people argue him at 2, and I definitely get it considering the way that Kucherov has played throughout his career. As of right now, I'd still put Gino there, but I do think there is a world where Kucherov potentially passes him. But still, Gino is going to go down to me as at least a top 3 Russian player of all time, and I think number 2 right now. And he was the best player in the world in 2012. No one could touch him. He was absolutely unbelievable in the 2009 playoffs. Him and Sid went off. His hat trick against Carolina will always live rent-free in my head. His big FU goal, I don't want to cuss on this podcast, but his big FU goal against the Flyers in 2008 when he just uncorked that slapper after getting hit behind the boards. Was he cherry picking? Yeah, he was cherry picking at the blue line, but he did not give a damn at all. I don't blame him. I would have done the same thing. And he let that puck go and just unleashed a scream going to the boards. It's still one of my favorite goals. The time when he knifed through the entire Lightning team, going 1-on-5 basically, and finishing it off with a really nice play. We keep going on and on about our favorite Gino moments, but again, he's going down, at least in Penguins history, top 4 player ever. I would put him number 3 right now. My top 4 right now is Lemieux, Sid, Gino, Jágr. If people want to argue Jágr 3, Gino 4, that's fine too. But right now I see him 3, and just like Sid, his number is going right up to the rafters the day after he retires, and he's the first Hall of Famer. But as for also this season, Kelsey, so people keep saying he's washed. I don't see it. I think if he was healthy last year and had better line mates, he would have had 60-plus points. And I think when you look at the top 9 right now, it's fairly decent. I think he's going to have some good line mates this year if they do it right. And if he stays healthy, I could see him maybe having a 60-point season somewhere in that department. Do I think he's a point-per-game player anymore? No. He's slowed down, obviously. He's 39. But can he have a 20-goal, 40-assist season at 39? I absolutely do think so, because I think he's going to have good line mates this year. And I wrote about that for the Hockey News a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, not only is he going to have better line mates this season, he should just have more consistent line mates, which will help. I mean, it's never easy to work with a rotating cast of characters. I know we've covered this in previous episodes, but I think that's a really big deal to Gino because, I mean, at the end of the day, Sid's always been the first line center. And he's kind of always gotten preference with his wingers and everything throughout the course of the era that they've both played in. And, not to say that Gino's gotten the leftovers over the year, because that wouldn't be accurate. The Penguins have had some incredible teams over their 16-year playoff run with Crosby and Malkin leading the charge. And it's not like they had weak top sixes, but there was a world where Brian Gibbons was playing in the Penguins' top six at some point. So, it's you think about the fact that Gino's always had a rotating cast of characters. This isn't a new thing.
Just look at his winners in the 09 Cup final. He played with Ruslan Fedotenko and Max Talbot a bunch.
Yes.
Come on.
See, yeah. And, I think, honestly, for once, we're going to see consistent line mates. We're going to actually see some young, talented players have the opportunity to flank him. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he surpasses the production from that 2023-2024 season. We'll see. It's up in the air, but I think that's going to do some wonders for him. And, maybe if he does have a good season, this might not be the end of Gino Malkin in Pittsburgh. I mean, it's very conceivable, especially with the cap going up the next couple seasons, that he signs 1-year deals or short-term deals until he decides to call it a career. The Penguins can afford that. They don't have any obligations on to any players other than Ville Koivunen, who's a pending RFA next season. They don't have any obligations to extend players on their current roster for a couple years. So they're kind of in an advantageous position here because of that. So, if Gino Malkin wants to keep playing beyond the season, that's probably his prerogative, and I'm sure the Penguins would be happy to have him back, even if it's in a more limited role going forward. But at the end of the day, this might be a little bit controversial of an opinion, but I would argue that Gino Malkin at his very peak, when he was playing his very best hockey, was better than Sidney Crosby. Playing his peak hockey. I don't think there's anybody when Malkin was in his prime, there was nobody in the league that could take over a game the way that he could individually. The way that he just had the ability to completely take the momentum in a game and shift it and change the course, change the outcome of games. There was nobody else in hockey that came close to that. Now, Sid was more consistently great throughout his career, right? That's inarguable. And he's, we mentioned his longevity, but Evgeni Malkin at his peak was a dominant player. And let the naysayers say whatever they want. Let them say Steven Stamkos deserves the Hart in 2012, blah, 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 blah. No way. No way. So yeah, happy birthday to Evgeni Malkin. Hopefully we'll see, more than 1 year, but even if this is the last year that he's on the Penguins and his last year in the National Hockey League, I kind of expect it to be a pretty good campaign from him, given, the better situation for him, hopefully. So, yeah. That'll about do it. I am ready to hit the road and get to the beach. But Hunter, remind everyone where they can find you and what you're working on with the Hockey News and with Locked On, because you did tell me something interesting before the podcast about what you and Pat are doing over at Locked On.
Yeah, so Pat and I are doing our top 25 Penguins of the last 25 years, but with a twist. It's not your typical, these are the overall top 25 best players to play for the last 25 years. It's, we got different categories. We got the 5 best to play for the last, 25 years. We have the top 5 moments guys. The top 5 dudes are like, oh yeah, these guys did play here. So it's really fun where you started the list last week with honorable mentions. We started the full list today with, Thursday we started the list with, these guys did play here. And then next week we have top 5 of a different category that we will tease next week. And as for the Hockey News, Kelsey, I got to figure out a feature, right? Just because it's so dead right now. So I'll figure that out, but we're going to have features this entire month. And then once we get through August, training camp's coming and we'll be up in Cranberry basically every day once that starts. So we're really excited, but I hope you enjoy the beats. It's always excited to get away, and we'll still have some good content though.
Yeah, we'll still be bringing content too. I will be in my beach chair and on my laptop a few times, but for the most part, I like to unplug a little bit. So I've taken a little bit of a hiatus, but you'll still see some content. As for me, I am going to be working on a Top Penguins prospect series that's going to be starting on during Beach Week. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, you can find me on X at Kelsey underscore Surmacz 4, Blue Sky, same thing without the underscore. And make sure you give the Pucks and At podcast a follow on socials if you have not, and subscribe to our Spotify channel and our YouTube channels so you can get notifications for when new episodes drop. As we've mentioned, we're going to try to make this probably a Friday thing. But next week, there probably won't be an episode because I, again, will be in a chair on the beach. So, but anyway, so thanks for tuning in, guys. We really appreciate it. We look forward to coming at you again in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, stay out of trouble and that.